Hello and welcome to CRANCAST, CRAN's official monthly podcast and interview series where we take you beyond the boardroom. In this podcast, we bring CRAN's regulatory work to life through honest and accessible conversation with CRAN's executives and technical experts. My name is Jennifer Mate. Let's journey beyond the boardroom. Consumer protection is at the heart of CRAN's mandate, yet many Namibians are unaware of their rights. This episode is designed to be the definitive consumer rights resource for the Namibian telecommunications, broadcasting, and postal service user. And my guest today is the Executive, Regulatory, and Corporate Legal Services, Josephine Shiweda, aka The Fixer. And we'll be talking knowing your rights, consumer protection, and the law. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for having me.
Josephine, if you had to summarize the rights of a Namibian telecommunications, broadcasting, and postal service user in one sentence, what would that sentence be?
Every Namibian consumer has a right to affordable, reliable, and meaningful connectivity. That's how I'd summarize it.
How many consumer complaints does CRAN receive in a typical year? And what are some of the common issues that you have seen come up?
Okay, well, on average, CRAN receives about 28 to about 35, I'd say, complaints per year. And these complaints really range from your quality of service issues. So it's issues relating to poor connectivity, it's the disruptions in the network, poor or low quality network that consumers receive. We also receive complaints relating to billing issues as well as data depletion.
Would you walk us through the complaints process from start to finish? What happens the moment a consumer reaches out to CRAN and when the decision is reached?
So when we receive a complaint, when a complainant actually approaches the regulatory authority, what we first do is determine whether or not we have the jurisdiction to hear the complaint. So this is an assessment of whether it falls within the perimeters of the Communications Act. Is it a postal related complaint? Is it telecommunications related? Or is it broadcasting related? Once we've made that determination, we then look at whether or not the complainant has previously engaged the service provider, the relevant service provider. And if they've done so, what was the outcome? Are they satisfied? Are they not satisfied? Did they even get a response from the service provider? So once we've made a determination on those two elements and we've assured or reconciled ourselves with the fact that we do, number one, have the mandate, and number two, that this matter has previously been taken to the service provider and that the consumer is not satisfied, and then we move into our formal adjudication process where we then have the consumer submit a formal complaint through the complaints form, which is a prescribed form in line with the Communications Act. This form is then submitted by the consumer, and we then provide the service provider, the applicable service provider, with the complaint to allow them to also then just give us a response to what has been submitted by this consumer. Once we have the response from the service provider, we then give feedback to the consumer on what the service provider has then provided us. And that is basically the process that we call exchange of pleadings. And this could be one or two set of correspondences that normally takes place. And usually during that exchange of pleadings, we then are able to have the matter concluded amicably between the two parties, being the service provider as well as the consumer. But there are times as well where there's no consensus that are reached, in that either the consumer is still not satisfied or the service provider is still adamant on the position that they are not in the wrong. In an event that such as that, the matter then reverts fully back into CRAN's court. We then do a technical as well as an independent assessment of all of the facts that have been provided to us. And we look at what has really transpired here. And once we've done that, we put together a submission as the legal and the regulatory department, and it goes through CRAN's internal governance processes. We've got committees within the company that look at these complaints, and then a formal decision is then taken.
What are some of the common mistakes consumers make when they are trying to have their complaint resolved, either with the service provider or with CRAN?
What we have observed in light of common mistakes that are made is that consumers often take to social media to raise concerns that they have with their service providers. In addition to taking to social media through commentary and so forth, they also then write letters and emails to CRAN. But in terms of the prescribed law, so what we require as CRAN to formally record a complaint is for a complainant to submit this complaint on the prescribed form. This allows the regulator to have a full overview of the nature of the complaint, all the circumstances around it. When did it happen? What happened? Who was the persons that you spoke to from the service provider perspective, for example? And with all of this information, we are able to then fully assist the consumers. And I think that would be the one thing that I would like to just highlight. It is important that the correct procedure is then followed to enable us to really assist the consumers with their complaints. They should not also take too long. Sometimes you had an issue that occurred a year ago, and only after a year you want to raise it with the regulator or the service provider. We actually urge them to take up the issue with the service providers as soon as reasonably possible after that the matter has occurred, and that they should come then with all of the necessary information, any applicable invoices, any applicable receipt, names of the persons that they have spoken to at call centers and so forth. And that is what would really just enable us to really assist in the best way that we can to resolve the issues as amicably and as swiftly as possible.
Consumers are required to contact the service provider before escalating the matter to CRAN. Why is that rule in place?
Okay. That rule is in place really in furtherance of a legal principle called the exhaustion of local remedies, where we then urge consumers to firstly try and resolve the complaints that they have with their service provider. So essentially, what we urge consumers in that regard is that let them take 14 days to try and resolve the matter. If they are not satisfied with the outcome from the service provider, or if the service provider has not even responded to them in any way, then they can then approach and escalate the matter to the next adjudication platform, which is, of course, then the recourse under the Communications Act. And CRAN can then look at the matter and see how to best assist the consumers in resolving the complaints that they have.
Earlier, you spoke about jurisdiction. What powers does CRAN have to enforce a decision in favor of a consumer? And what happens if a service provider refuses to comply?
While the Communications Act, read together with our regulations for adjudication of disputes, basically empowers CRAN to investigate and make a decision in terms of any complaint that has been brought to the authority. And with that decision, there is then an obligation on every service provider to ensure that they comply with it. And in the event that a service provider has not complied with the decision that has been made by CRAN, the Act then further gives us the mandate and the powers to take further action, such as either issuing enforcement orders or summons, or even going the full on court route and issuing legal proceedings in the courts.
As digital services become more complex, from streaming mobile money to app based services, How is CRAN's consumer protection framework keeping pace?
Okay. So as the digital ecosystem is evolving, it's only fair that the framework that regulates it also then evolves. And as a regulator, we have taken a few proactive steps to just aid this process. Number one, what we have done is we currently embarking on a project where we want to introduce a regulatory sandbox to test these emerging technologies such as AI, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, 5G, and so forth. Well, and the hope in testing these new emerging technologies is that we will then have a recommendation in place, an informed recommendation in place that will help us then review our existing legal framework and make the necessary amendments to our laws, our pieces of legislation, where applicable, to really ensure that we not only incorporate these new emerging technologies, but that we also then ensure that we also strengthen our consumer protection mechanisms.
What is the most single important thing you want every Namibian to know about their rights?
Um, I would like to say that if a consumer experiences poor connectivity or unfair billing or any other issue that is in contravention of the Communications Act and the quality of service regulations, please engage your service provider. Raise your concerns with your service provider so that we give them the opportunity to first try and resolve the issue. And if you are unsatisfied with the outcome that you receive from the service provider, then our doors as a regulator are open. And we will then adjudicate over these complaints and try as best as we can to resolve them. And what every complaint that is then received by the regulator is then seen as, it's seen as an opportunity to help us hold the service providers accountable for the non-compliance with the quality of service regulations, as well as the Communications Act and the accompanying regulations as well. And I would like to also just highlight that, and I think I said this at the beginning, that every Namibian consumer has a right to affordable, reliable, and meaningful connectivity. But with this right also comes a responsibility for the consumers. And this responsibility is for the consumer to also use their voice. Speak up. Speak up and raise the concerns with the relevant service provider and the regulator as well, so that we can then amicably and more efficiently try and resolve the complaints that are raised.
As Josephine said, you have a voice and it matters, so raise your concerns. And that brings us to the end of this very insightful conversation. Thank you so much, Josephine, for taking us beyond the boardroom. Remember to share this far and wide for the benefit of others. And while you're at it, like and subscribe to our channel. One more thing, CRANCAST is on Spotify. From myself and the CRANCAST team, see you next time.